Hello, everyone. Good to have you with us. Let's give ourselves maybe 30 seconds for the rest of the attendees to join us. Okay, I think while we wait for the rest of the attendees to join us, let me just give a little bit of an introduction before we move on proper into the webinar. So a little bit about APACMed. APACMed is short for the Asia Pacific Medical Technology Association. We are a non-profit medical technology association representing companies operating in the medical device, diagnostics, and digital health space. Specifically, we lead the efforts to advance medical technologies in order to raise the standards of care for patients in the Asia Pacific region. So we are fundamentally a membership-based organization, but what drives us are the committees that we have around policy, regulation, and advocacy. So currently we have about 161 members, including 20 of the top 30 global MedTech companies. So the likes of Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Abbott, Stryker, they're all part of our member companies. But there's one segment of the membership that I want to highlight. 70 of 161 members are actually startups, and they account for 40% of our members. And it is because of this reason, the growing, startup community that are part of our membership, that we have decided to launch a founder series, which is an initiative of the APACMed Startup Committee to support startups. And today's webinar, the founder series webinar, is one such initiative where on a monthly basis, we look at topics that are relevant to the startup community, and we onboard, or we bring on board senior business leaders like Ee Bin today, to address specific topics that are relevant to our startups. So today, the webinar is on building effective regulatory strategy. Yeah, advancement made in medical technologies are inevitably accompanied by medical device regulatory changes soon after. Yeah, for startups, developing a flexible yet compliant regulatory strategy is one of the most valuable assets to possess during the fundraising process, because it allows the fledgling companies to easily highlight critical milestones of the market entry and set mutual expectation. Today, the webinar, the purpose of the webinar is to shed some light on the very peculiar nature of regulatory strategies for MedTech startups as compared to strategies applied in a larger corporation, the relationship with other market forces, and gain clarity on the steps to develop a strategy best fit for your startup and your company. So a little bit about Ee Bin. Ee Bin spent about 16 years in several large medical device multinational companies, spanning from production line management, design and development, quality and regulatory, commercial operations across the Asia Pacific region. But he now lends his expertise, his experience, and his energy to the MedTech SME around the globe. Ee Bin is the CEO of Access to Healthcare, a global commercialization and market access consulting company that physically execute end-to-end market entry and product launch activities to help overcome various challenges faced by medical technology startups. Yeah, especially in the area of healthcare business due diligence, commercialization solutions from concept to market, and market access activities such as regulatory, quality, and trade compliance. So without further ado, I will hand this session over to Ee Bin. Ee Bin, over to you.
Thank you, Gabriel, for the great introduction. So without further ado, let me try to share my screen. Okay. Let's try to. Is this really sharing?
Yes, it's sharing. Yep.
It's sharing, right? So you see a white screen, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, we've got it.
Morning, everyone. So we're going to actually talk about a little bit about building an effective regulatory strategy, right, in a rainy Thursday morning, right? So my name is Ee Bin, and I'm happy to participate this webinar together with APACMed. So just to put things into perspective, right? Many of the startups, right, have utilized much innovation and technologies that is stemming from institutions and research organizations, right, to create products. And with all this, right, this is actually in tandem with a lot of regulatory changes, right, and it's coming to us, right, from all different angles. Right, without showing the data, actually in the world, about 230 countries, right, there's actually about 120 countries that are actually regulated. Right, it's not very far away. Right? So developing a very flexible yet compliant strategy is one of those important assets for any startup company, because that is one very critical aspect of your go-to-market strategy. Right? Go-to-market strategy has things like your pricing strategy, your market segmentation, right? Intellectual property management, and of course, right, the path towards the regulatory approvals, right, in all those markets that you had probably planned, right? So this strategy is very important for you to highlight to your stakeholders, to your board, right, to the potential investors, right, so that they can be brought in to your journey together. Sometimes, right, it's just something different about startups, right, because many times I think startup companies would ask for advice from various people about, well, how do we do this, how do we do that, what could be the specifics, right? And usually the first port of call now, as of all things, is you Google, right? You go to the internet, then you ask people, then you ask people that may have experience, and so on and so forth. However, because just like the product that I mentioned about any startup, which is usually very, very innovative, right? The pathway to your regulatory strategy, right, is also very innovative, right? So this has to go hand in hand. So sometimes some of those templates or some of those ways of working, right, that is used probably in larger organizations may or may not work. So this is some of those things that we would like to discuss in this webinar. So if you look into any startup's pathway, right, towards success, right, they always try to look for markets, right, which are always growing. Political stability is actually one of the very important things, right, to any startup or any company for that matter. So one of the things that I'd like to also highlight is Asia Pacific in this sense, right, stands in a very, very good position. So because if you compare APAC with Latin America, with the Middle East, with Africa, with Russia for that matter, and all that, then suddenly you realize that Asia looks pretty good. Okay. So, but with Asia, there's a lot of challenges, right? One of them being distance. So distance is not necessarily in terms of the absolute point A to point B distance. Sometimes it's just a case of crossing the border, like in Europe, right? If you drive from one place to the other in Europe, from Italy to Montpellier in France, right? It's not a problem. But for us, let's say, for example, Singapore, right? You want to cross to Johor, right? Which is at 20 kilometers across, right? To just have some food and all that, right? Able to queue up, able to chop the passport and all that. And actually going to other countries around in Southeast Asia, in other parts of Asia is the same, even though the absolute distance may not be that far away. So that's actually a problem, because we have different types of people, different races, right? Different languages, right? And different income levels, different government policies, different types of governments. So all your marketing and pricing strategies are all in a mess, right? And that would mean that different regulations and usually come out to a very, very long time to market. And because of all these reasons, right, then a lot of times, right, you're stuck, right? Then that leads on to either underwhelming sales results or maybe very bad forecasts, right? And a lot of efforts actually really need to go in. So why all that? Why is all that? A lot of startups, right, go through this very, very painful journey. So we would like to see what are some of those reasons why this is the case. Now, one of the things that we felt was fairly important is to understand the differences between all these different organizations. So I kind of divided this into four, right? Startups, small enterprises, medium-sized enterprises, and multinationals, really large ones, like in excess of 10 billion, right? That's large. So if you look into the next column, right, we put it in terms of the product innovation level. So now here I'd like to try to explain, right, why we kind of made these assessments. In a startup, usually, as mentioned earlier, you usually get a lot of technology from the institutes, from the universities, sometimes from the hospital. So they've probably never been thought of before, or some of the technologies has never been applied into medical technology. Right? So the innovation level can be extremely high. Once this small startup grows and it expands and it becomes a smaller enterprise, then it starts to stabilize its product portfolio. So then maybe it's not trying to push the envelope so much, right? Trying to stabilize itself, have maybe product improvements, or utilize your technology platform to create different variants, different applications, and that's all right. And as the company grows into a medium-sized company, which we'll probably put it at around maybe 50 million to up to maybe 500 million, thereabouts, then, right, you will find that they were just interested in selling, interested in just providing better versions, right? Because a lot of the times, some of these products may become commoditized. So you're fighting with other people that has similar products. So pricing, service level becomes extremely important. Then the funny thing here is that if you follow this trend, why would a large MNC have a very high product innovation level? That's because, right, there's always this mandate to push this envelope. So some of these very large companies, right, yeah, some of them, not all of them, right, would actually have a innovation center, an innovation department, which is filled with engineers, filled with researchers, and filled with people that brings information from the market to them, right? And some of the companies that I used to work for, right, we have actually innovation centers and several innovation centers and tackling several different market segments on various products. So they have a lot of very, very new tech, right, in which they are seeing whichever ones that will be applied, right, to the marketplace 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, okay? So with that, right, then that's where you get this other column about product lines. Usually a startup starts with only one product or two, right? And as you grow into a small enterprise, you will get a few. When it becomes a medium enterprise, then you start to create many variants, many segments, right? Sometimes you acquire, right? And large MNCs are very hungry and very greedy, right? They will give you the whole complete system. Like sometimes when we apply for tender, right, we will quote like 40 million, we will basically just populate the entire hospital, right? So for the people that's dialed in, there's actually a good mix of startup companies, people from multinationals, right? service providers and all that. So some of your answers, right, to why certain strategies are so different, right, already lies in the first two columns here. Then because of the type of products, then your channel, right, that means how you conduct sales will start to be different. Startups, right, usually would have very little reach unless they are very good at traveling. They have a strong, I'll say, clinical and medical team, which has a great network of doctors and all that. Then it's probably slightly different, right? Or however, or maybe you're doing some software as a medical device, right, in which maybe you don't really need distributors, right? But more often than not, right, it will be actually distributors. So therefore, the type of channel will be called the indirect channel. As you grow into a small and medium-sized enterprise, right, you would start to grow out of this indirect channel. You start to depend less on your distributors. Right? We'll get to that in a while, because there are a lot of challenges when engaging with distributors. Right? So you could see under medium enterprise, there's this thing about mixed model. Mixed model means that there's a mix between direct and indirect channels. Direct channel means you're selling directly, right? So that means you have an office, you have a sales force, or maybe you have no office, but you have a sales force, and you sell some via direct channels, some via indirect channels. So indirect channels are very good for commoditized products. Me Too products, that's okay. But for some of those ones that are a little bit special, it's really strongly advised, right, for the company to travel often and meet with stakeholders or potential customers. This is one of those things that I think startups today is not doing enough, right? Go out there, travel, and go to the ground. So when you become a very large MNC, right, then you will see that there's a lot of mixed models, right, direct and indirect, depending on what the product is. Okay, so as you go to the next column, right, market entry penetration. So startups usually, because of stakeholder pressure and all that, there may be some countries that you must go, right? So one of the possibilities is that you must launch in your local country, like Singapore, Hong Kong, China, something like that. And then after that, you go out elsewhere. Some say that, oh, because it's important for us to go to the US because then the next investor will be coming in, because you're raising funds series after series. So maybe that's one of those situations where you need to launch in certain countries, right? As you grow into a small enterprise, right, you will actually stick quite closely to the countries that you actually have launched into. We'll also go into a little bit into that in a while, right? So because you're trying to drive revenue, right, to build both your top line and your bottom line, right? And once you go into a middle-sized enterprise, right, you will always keep on doing these things, right? Then attempt to start to go into new markets. So there's a lot of companies from Europe and the US, right, been selling for like 15, 20 years in those places, and suddenly they start to reach into Asia. Why? Because, oh, we've been successful, I think we've done enough, so maybe we could try a new market. In large MNCs, right, because of the presence of those of the company around the world, usually is a global launch, right? You may have some prioritization, but usually is a global launch. Now, if you look in the very last column, right, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Okay, so our advice for startups, right, is sell wherever you can sell, right? I really wish that I could have done one slide where I had this wall and I could throw mud, right? And as it says, right, okay, whatever mud that sticks onto the wall, yeah, that's the one that goes. Why? Because as a startup, right, to be very, very honest, you have no say in which whether the market likes or don't like your product, right? Sometimes what you wish is different from what the market says, right? So again, right, that goes back to the point in which traveling, meeting customers, potential stakeholders is extremely important. Because with this, then you can really understand what the market wants, whether the market wants you. Okay, so I would really implore a lot of startups, right, to just try as far as possible and just go wherever the market tells you, at least for the first 2 years. Right? Then once you start to generate revenue, right, investors will come to you, then maybe you can get back into some of those planning, the planning mode that you were in, right, in the start of the journey. Small enterprises would have a little bit of money, like a lot of Japanese companies that I see, right? They have a little bit of money, they will join some trade association, then they will go for trade fairs, they would go for their own trade mission, right? They will just go to a few countries, talk to a few people and all that, or use that opportunity to meet some of those indirect channel partners which they have found, right? Those distributors, right? So then from there, they have real-time intel, because after they find out, right, they could immediately report back into the company and say, oh, we may have an opportunity here, right? Medium-sized enterprise will always go back to their original customer base, right? Because that's the tried and tested, and that's their bread and butter, okay? And sometimes they may consider to combine something with another company to form one solution, right? Either that or a joint venture. Like a lot of startups love to go to China, dread the long regulatory approval process. Then next thing you know, they'll be looking for a joint venture with a local partner, manufacture locally, then reduce the time in half, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's very standard formula, right? And large MNCs, right, again, because of the large customer base, they will again go back to their current customers and maybe find new stakeholders. Some guys go to Vietnam, for example, private-public partnership, PPP, right, and create very large solutions. Remember, they love to push complete ecosystems, right? So with this market entry strategy, then you realize that completely screws up your regulatory strategy. So all these things about, oh, let's get CE marking, or let's get 510K approval, then after that we go out elsewhere. It's all out the window. So sometimes, perception is perception, reality is reality. It's okay to think global, the reality is not yet, right? So you've done your best to create an innovative product, so innovative that the distributors doesn't even know how to sell it, right? Again, it brings back to the point that you have to do some of the selling yourself. And the best funding strategy is always to gain your own revenue, right? So you can raise round after round after round, right? But the tried and tested way is still, right, getting your own revenue. So how does this affect your regulatory strategy? So is to realize that because you are just going after any market that sticks, right? Okay, there's no one size fits all strategy anymore, because it really depends on what sticks, what's your product, who are the people in the company, and so on and so forth, right? However, having a generic technical file does help in a very large sense, because as regulated countries are gradually, very gradually converging their regulatory frameworks, right? It still is a good idea, right? So understand the relationship with other market factors, which earlier, right, in the table, I kind of made some points, right, for you to consider, right? It must be flexible. Sell wherever you could sell, right? Get revenue, get investors interested, then go for it. So when is the regulatory strategy put together? Right, for a startup company, actually, there are several points in which this strategy, right, needs to be developed. So it's actually a living document. Now, many times after research, like many institutions and hospitals that we do business with, a lot of times they have a product of innovation, and after applying for their intellectual property, they would start to think about how to license this out. And more often than not, there's always this requirement of having some form of regulatory strategy. So this is when, right, you start to put the groundwork, right, of what countries we would like to launch to, what are these requirements that are being asked by the regulatory frameworks of these countries, just some rough idea, but knowing full well that these ideas will eventually be revised. So as you move along, right, into prototype phase, right, as your engineering conceptualization starts to take place, then you will get more in touch with a lot of users. Then you start to realize that in some countries, maybe it doesn't work. In some countries, maybe the clinical workflow just doesn't work. Then you have to give it up and try somewhere else. So this is where, right, you start to realize that, hey, maybe the countries that I have to sell to is kind of different. Then because of that, then you have to backtrack a little bit and see, oh, now I have to sell to this country, that country, what are the regulatory requirements? Isn't it? As the product matures, right, as the iteration progresses and you start to move towards design freeze, right, then you get more and more market feedback. So if, for some of you, if you never thought of going out there and ask for market feedback during these first 3 phases, probably it's time to do so, or maybe after the rain. So probably time to do so. Once you've reached a stage where your product is ready to launch, right, that's when you finalize your go-to-market strategy and therefore your regulatory strategy. You are clear after getting a lot of feedback where this product is supposed to go, right? So therefore you really have to plan that. Now there's a lot of things, right, that also goes around the design and development phase, in the sense that regulatory requirements is not just this whole pile of paper that you're putting out. Regulatory requirements also means standards compliance, right? In Korea, right, 60 Hertz, EMC, different. You have to include all this in your design verification. So that's actually a regulatory requirement, right? Some places you have to get an additional certification, right? Going to Taiwan, if you're having Wi-Fi, for example, for wireless transmission, then you will send a sample to NCC for testing or all that. So all these are also regulatory requirements. It's not just about medical device, but sometimes it depends on your product, right? And you may have to consider other regulatory jurisdictions to ensure that your product can really be imported. Any regulatory processes will involve all these players, right? The manufacturer, the importer, customs, and hospital. And of course, you have to deal with the regulatory authorities, right? So submission documents goes into the regulatory authority through the authorized representative in the country. So it depends on whether you're a startup, your SME, your MSE, right? Then that's authorized representative may be different. So for the smaller setups, either that will be a distributor or that could be a third-party service providers, like some of you in the call, like us, right? So after going through the regulatory approval, then you get the approval documents that gets being sent back into the authorized representation and goes back into the manufacturer. Then this is when you decide, okay, fine, I think we're ready to ship. Goes through customs, provide documents, it clears, delivery, then it reaches the end user. Right. So as mentioned, sometimes you may have situations such as radiation, telecommunications that you may have to consider. So that has to be applied along the way. So I said that we have to touch a little bit about dealing with indirect channels, because many startups would eventually have to deal with them. Right? So as you make friends with some of the distributors, then the usual question, so what documents do you need? We're very connected to the government, just leave it to us. So this really happened. So one of our clients, right, Korean company, right, and they have I'll say a strategic partner in another Korean company who is a software as a medical device, right? So software as a medical device is indeed regulated in Thailand. And as a result, right, we said, okay, so since you're selling together, and they have a distributor partner, so let them do it. But the guy doesn't even know that some of these exact regulatory requirements, and said exactly that. Just give us your letter of authorization and we will deal with the rest, which is not true, right? So sometimes when you see statements or hear statements such as this, right, take extra care. So you start to maybe ask another question. So what do you really need? No, just wait for the good news. So months and months and months later, then maybe sometimes you get something, maybe sometimes you don't. Most of the time you don't. Another way, right, they will say, oh, just give me whatever you have, come on, just give it to me, right? Which ones? Everything, just give it to me. Then next thing you know, you get nothing. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that even if you're a startup, even if you're just 2 persons, 1 person, you still have to understand what you are doing, right? You have to have some idea that if you're launching in this country because there's business, what are these things to expect, right? Don't just leave it to a distributor. Some of you may feel that, oh, maybe I won't do this. Some of you who are in multinationals who are sold, in sole distributor channel methods of selling, right, would start to smile and laugh because sometimes some of the distributors are saying exactly what I'm saying. So most of the time, right, a lot of times, I guess many internet resources or trainings and all that, they would explain that, yeah, it's mostly your technical file, so the product description, your design verification and validation, risk assessment, essential principles, and so on and so forth. But a lot of countries, right, have legal requirements, right, in which they want certain things to be made either via authentication, via legalization, or via notarization. Why is that? That's because a lot of documents in the past were being falsified. So governments are really scared that someone just kind of do a little bit of document magic, and next thing you know, you have a fraudulent case, right? So there are several different definitions of that, right? Authentication is verification of the genuineness of a document or signature to make it effective or valid, right? So there's usually some kind of a stamp, right, and a signatory. Legalization is basically certifying a legal document so that a foreign country's legal system will recognize it with full legal effect, right? Notarization is quite simple, right? Just send to the notary public, right? They sign the original document, they sign off, they chop it, and that's it, they'll obey it, right? So the thing here is that different countries ask for different versions. Some ask for authentication, some ask for legalization, which means that you may have to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, embassies to do this, right? And some just basically ask for notarized documents. Some don't ask at all. So these are some of those things that startups should be aware that you have to spend time, you have to understand, and you have to spend a little bit of money to pay for all these services, right? Okay, so sometimes they feel that, oh, let me just give you this file. No, so these things take time. Some of these legalization process could take a month, 2 months, right? And sometimes in difficult situations such as COVID-19 situations now, right, it could take several months. So a lot of startups will start to learn about what's a technical file, what's CSTT, and what's 510K. They are not exactly the same, right? So a technical file literally is a file, electronic or otherwise, right, in which all the documents that describes the medical device is being found. So in the US, this is called the device master records. So that's the foundation of the technical file going into the European Union. CSTT stands for Common Submission Dossier Template. So some of you MSCs who are attending would kind of like groan, and because you've been doing this for a long time, right? So this is very similar to a technical file, sends a few extra things, including an executive summary, right? and grouping, and a list of configurations. 510K, right, is a pre-submission form by US FDA for all classes that are class 2 or higher, right? The manufacturer needs to consolidate, all this information needs to be consolidated to determine that the device is substantially equivalent to another legacy device. So if you are the latest and greatest X-ray that's the size of my fist, right, this is no different from the X-ray that was created in the 19th century. Right. However, for 510Ks, the US FDA some years ago decided that a lot of those legacy equipment couldn't be used as predicates anymore, right? So they set some limit in which the most recent devices that have been approved by the FDA can only be used as predicates. So you can't use any X-ray that was in the 19th century anymore. So as design and development progresses, right, when you develop a product, right, as part of ISO 13485 or even the QSR, Quality System Regulations from the US FDA, you'll be needed to put together a design history file, right? So a lot of the design history files will go into what is needed for a 510K, what is needed for a device master records, which is a technical file, right, and CSTT. So there's actually some differences, right, between a technical file, a CSTT, and a 510K, right? Other than the forms itself, the format, right, there are some specific requirements that are slightly different. There are many things similar too, right? General information, intended use, indication for use. Bear in mind, right? In the EU is intended purpose, right? Then name and address of manufacturer, product descriptions, specifications, labeling, applicable standards. All of these, right? You will find in your design history file. So if you put that file together well, right, you should have no problems. Some of the little differences, right, would be, for example, in between a technical file and a 510K submission, right, is that in a technical file, some documents are mandatory. A CER, clinical evaluation report, is mandatory. Not all 510Ks require a formal report. There's a section on clinical evaluation, you will have to write on it, right, but it's not necessary to have a report. Post-market clinical follow-up, right? This is PMCF. This is the term that is being put into prominence, right, with the new EU medical device regulations, EU MDR, right? So PMCF is asked by higher risk devices in the FDA. So there are all these little subtle differences which you will find out when you get to the point as you are launching a product. So here we highlight 6 different fatal mistakes. So it's quite funny because one of our team members put this deck together with myself, and she was saying that, Ee Bin, are you sure there's only 6? There could be easily more than 10. It's like, okay, fine, we just leave it to 6. So some companies say, oh, we don't have money for a full-blown biostatistics-driven clinical trial, so we just skip it. Now, a lot of startups that we saw, okay, have this notion that you have this thing called preclinicals. Okay, fine. Preclinicals, right, in a sense, could mean first in human, could mean usability study, could mean that this sample size is not enough for you to put into your clinical evaluation report. So in some cases, there is no escape. You have to make sure that there's sufficient power, right, for your clinical trial or clinical study to be valid. Very, very basic stuff, right? So yeah, since our device is low risk, maybe you just do a small trial and just write the CER. Maybe yes, maybe no, because there are still some cases where you could get away with just literature review. But however, right, it all starts firstly from your risk management, your essential principles. Then from these two documents, then you can decide whether you could get away with just writing up that without performing a clinical study. But once you perform a clinical study, there has to be sufficient power. Yeah, preclinical is good enough for safety and efficacy. That's not true. Okay. We'll worry about production later, right? Our hands are too full with the product design. So let's leave it to the contract manufacturer. We would really, really like startups, right, to own their own manufacturing for the first 2 years, because this is when you will realize a lot of product problems. You will realize that a lot of complaints from your customers, right, that you could address fairly quickly and very easily, right? And you have a sense of belonging to the device, right? So we will really advise some startup companies not to outsource too quickly, right? However, if you really have no choice, then okay. However, during product design, this is when, right, you have to already consider things such as design for manufacturing. Yeah. So when you consider things for design for manufacturing, right, and things like that, sometimes you may miss out a few things, and that may have an effect on your technical file, and that may have an effect on your regulatory approvals. So since we use all the materials are all biocompatible, so it is understood. Well, yes, you understand, your colleagues understand, but the regulatory authorities don't understand. This is not to say that even all materials need to be tested for biocompatibility. If you clearly have used materials that are biocompatible, you just have to state so, right, in your risk management file and in your essential principles. But you can't just miss it out. And yeah, this one I learned from some years ago when I was teaching in a class. Oh, there must be a standard for everything. It's favorite for Singaporeans, right? There must be some standard for everything. Not true. Why? Because there are some standards that are just not created, and this is why you have design and development processes. Because when you actually trace from design input, right, all the requirements into specifications, and then it forms the basis for your verification and validation. That is the reason why, right, you need to do certain testing. Some tests you can leverage on standards, some tests you don't. So it's not that you have to find a standard for everything. And when you cannot find a standard, doesn't mean you don't have to test. Okay? Because you have to follow whatever your design process has told you to. So let's say, for example, your product is really launched, right? And you would like to see how to deal with regulatory authorities. First thing, you have to demonstrate technical competence. You have to know your material, you must be sure of what you're saying. If you ask the questions, just present the evidence in your responses. Don't just say yes or no, or I think we did this, right? Always substantiate this with objective evidence, right? Some of these regulators are not very smart, right? Because some of them could be pharmacists, some of them could be just brought in from a totally different industry, some of them got transferred from the lab and all that. So they're trying their best, right? No one wants to do a bad job. They're trying their best. So if they don't know your product, right, don't do that, all right? Just try to be patient and gradually make them understand. So most of the time, right, okay, if they ask for things, right, okay, don't just say no. And what normally happens, right, is when sometimes some of this information is something that you deemed as company proprietary information, right, secret sauce or things like that. In some cases, right, if you have no choice, you just have to give it, because that's just the rule, the game rules in this country, right? So when they ask, just always say, okay, we'll check internally and come back to you. Then have a discussion to see how much you can give. If they are nasty, never go head on, right? You will always lose. Because why? It's their backyard, it's their rules, right? So don't go ahead with it. Countries have different stages of regulatory development, right? So this is just an example in the ASEAN countries, right? So certain countries are a little bit more advanced in terms of the time they have applied regulations and the extent of it being technical, right? Some of them are not. Some of them are fairly basic still, but in any case, for this bunch, right, they all have to eventually implement and rectify the ASEAN Medical Device Directive, right, very soon. Bureaucracy is unavoidable, and it stands for being conservative. I'd like to actually say this word for some of the regulators who face immense pressure to have approvals done quickly, but at the same time, right, they struggle to understand what the device is, right? So when you have that, right, they always would like to err on the side of caution because they don't want to send an unsafe product into their country, isn't it? So sometimes if you understand this, right, you will understand why certain processes take so long, why some processes are just very convoluted and so on and so forth, because you've got to stand on the other side of the fence and just see from that perspective. So some of you may go to meetings and you may meet some of the regulators. So it's okay to be close in the sense that you can chit-chat with them, especially if they could be from the same country or different country. You could actually go out with them and all that. It's fine, right? But however, work is work, and I would really like to stress that it's never good to make friends with a regulator by asking them a question about your company straight away. Just make friends. Just say hi, how are you doing? Oh, you must have a tough job, so do I. And then after that, take it from there, yeah? So always, right, draw a very respectful line between the authorities and ourselves. Okay, so with that, I've concluded my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. So here, I'd like to see whether there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Ee Bin. Yeah, so earlier on you mentioned, some of the multinational companies, they have a number of, innovation teams internally that are potentially looking to collaborate and partner with startups. So we have a question here. As a startup, if we are looking at M&A or licensing deal with larger corporates, how would the regulatory strategy be different?
It will depend very much on how this product, right, is integrated into the solution in a multinational. Let's try this. Okay. Japanese company. So they made a very different version of a monitor, because this monitor could really go into the MRI, to the MRI room. So as you know, right, the MRI, you cannot have anything metal, but for some reason, this monitor is able to go in. So what they try to do, right, is that initially they try to partner with any MRI company, right? So there's the big four, there's also the second tier MRI companies. So they try to find some way to partner together, to sell together. Larger companies would say that, okay, fine, we can partner with you, we can add on as a solution. However, you go get your own regulatory approval, right? Then they try to go to the smaller MRI companies. And here is when the smaller MRI companies surprisingly says that, hey, why not we acquire your technology and you become part of us, and then after that we try to do this. So it really, but that said, right, whatever it is, whether the situation one or situation two, it is still two different products. So you have to apply for approvals here, apply for approvals there. Some products maybe it's an accessory. Some accessories could be electronic or active in nature, i.e. a software, an app. Some could be mechanical in nature. Maybe it's a fixture or just something to aid the clinician and things like that. So these may be created by startup companies in which multinationals would be interested to acquire, right? So usually when multinationals acquire this, right, okay, I think from the licensing perspective, that's being handled by the guys doing intellectual property and the legal guys. From a regulatory perspective, usually that means a separate approval. So one of my ex-companies, we acquire companies all the time. So this brings big headaches for my team, because then there'll be like another 500 products to approve and have zero product knowledge. So there's no way around this except learning more about the product and managing the product approval separately.
Right. Thank you, Ee Bin. I think, let's see if we have another question. Okay, can we use the EU technical file for submission in Singapore?
Singapore doesn't accept the EU technical file. It does accept the CSTT. If you compare the CSTT with the technical file, as mentioned earlier, the executive summary needs to be put together, right? And some other things which are fairly minor. So if you have a very strong foundation in your design history file and a technical file, then creating a CSTT shouldn't be a problem.
Right, thank you. Yep, I don't think we have, any more questions in the chat feature. So maybe I'll say a few words. Thank you, Ee Bin, for taking us through this session today. So yeah, let me just say a few words before we end the session. I think the pathway from design to commercialization for a new medical device can be complex and full of uncertainty. A specific product claim or intended use can lead to varying product classifications and registration path due to differences in laws and regulations of different markets. Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of things that I learned from today's session, thanks to Ee Bin, is, one, there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. Number two, I think the regulatory strategy should be planned, at the earliest possible stage of product development. And the third thing that I learned is really a well-planned, regulatory strategy should be balanced, should be realistic and achievable to support the startup or the organization's mission and vision. Yeah. So with this, I'd like to thank Ee Bin and all of you for joining us at this webinars today, and we look forward to having you with us at the next webinar on the 21st of July. So meanwhile, have a good rest of the week. Take care and stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.